Croeso and welcome to the Tennis Wales podcast.
I'm Elise.
And I'm Owain.
And we're your hosts.
Each episode will be shining a spotlight on what makes tennis in Wales so special. From the people driving the sport forward to the stories shaping its future.
So whether you're a player, a coach, or just love the game, sit back and enjoy as we dive into the heart of Welsh tennis.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is Louie Harris, one of the leading figures in British Padel right now. Louie is Wales number 1, GB number 3, and the LTA number 1, as well as the LTA national champion in 2025. He's represented Wales and Great Britain on the international stage, came within a third set tie-break of beating the world number 37 at the last year's Euros. And he also has competed professionally in the Pro Padel League with the San Diego Stingrays. In this episode, we'll talk about Louie's journey from tennis to padel, what it really takes to compete at the top level in the UK representing Wales, and where he sees the future of padel heading. Louie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. That's a strong intro right there. You picked me up a bit too much, but yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay, right. So the first question, just to get to know you, is so you're currently Wales number 1, but away from all the rankings and the titles, how would you describe yourself as a player and as a person?
As a player, I think, someone that's fairly aggressive in his style. I definitely like to, use sort of, strength and power as an advantage, spend as much time as I can at the net, sort of looking to finish the point. I say that's kind of the best description of my playing style. As a person, I'd say quite simple. Always been big on sport. Like I was always going to do something, if it wasn't padel, it would have been something else. Don't really get up to anything crazy, like my sport, like chilling out, big on food. But otherwise I'm just kind of relaxing, seeing friends and family, nothing too wild.
And growing up in Wales, when did the sport first become a serious part of your life? Was there a moment you realised you have the mindset to compete at a really high level?
In padel?
Yes, in padel.
So whilst I was living in Wales, I hadn't discovered padel yet. So growing up in Wales, I played rugby. That was my main sport. I played a bit of tennis when I was younger. Did judo, tried boxing, did a few sports, but growing up in Wales, it was all about my rugby. So it wasn't actually until I moved to Spain that I found out what padel was. So yeah, in terms of living in Wales, padel wasn't something that came to mind yet.
And when did you move to Spain?
I was around 12 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. And then in terms of, like you said, you've played quite a few sports. Like as an athlete when you were younger, have you had any moments which is when you were a kid that has shaped like your competition today in terms of competing, like if you play rugby at a high level when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think playing multiple sports was definitely a big advantage. I think it is for anyone that's tried a lot of things out. I do think rugby helped a lot in terms of sort of discipline and mentality. There's not really much physical carryover you can take from rugby to padel. They're very different sports. Your standard build is going to be very, very different. But I think that the level of discipline is much, much higher in rugby. I think it has to be in any contact sport. So I think that's sort of the biggest advantage going into padel. And also, you're part of a bigger team. So, even though it's a small team and is a team sport, padel, you always play with a partner. So I think, playing at a team sport before that was, made it easier to get used to just playing with a partner all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned then you played a lot of sports. I think you've played a bit of tennis as well, didn't you, before your padel? Do you remember the first time when you played padel, and did that feel familiar because of tennis, or was it completely alien? Was it completely different?
No, there was definitely carryover there. It had been quite a while from, let's say, the last time I played tennis until the first time I played padel. So it wasn't necessarily like I was in the rhythm of playing tennis, but I think, if you played any racket sport for a fair amount of time, trying padel for the first time won't feel too difficult. So yeah, definitely a bit of a head start in terms of, first few times playing. It didn't feel too strange, except obviously that wall element, right? All of that was new, but sort of your basic ground strokes are going to feel fairly similar.
Yeah, nice. And in terms of, like if there's anything that you had to unlearn from tennis, is there anything, or did it just transfer over?
I'd say I was quite lucky that, I didn't play enough tennis for it to become too much of a bad habit.
Yeah.
Like I never, made it to necessarily a high level. I never really competed at a high level. So the technique was more just learning paddle rather than unlearning tennis strokes, which is quite common now, where you've got people that have played tennis, for like 10, 15, 20 years, then going into paddle. It makes it very difficult to sort of unlearn those habits. But I'd say I was fairly fortunate that, it was more just that basic hand-eye coordination, being decent at racket sports. So it's kind of started from a fairly neutral technique.
Nice.
And when did paddle go from being fun to this could be something really serious for me to have a go at?
It took quite a long time. It was kind of a slow process of it was fun for a long time, and then I'd say the steps along the way were kind of from first representing GB as a junior for the first time. Obviously, it was a great experience, but the big picture, paddle was still quite small, even though there was these competitions happening, representing GB. It still wasn't a known sport, so that was a good little step. Obviously, it showed that there was potential, but I'd say it wasn't until I competed for the men's team the first time in 2019, while still being a junior, that then I thought, well, okay, well, if we're in the men's team now, this is probably, shaping up to be a little bit more of a career in a couple of years. And then I say maybe 2020 to 2021 was that sort of time where I went, okay, I think this is getting serious enough now where, I need to commit more to the training and sort of invest in traveling to play and train. And that was probably the switch to, to kind of go into it.
Nice. And now you're competing to a really high level in paddle. Do you ever think that tennis players watching paddle like underestimate how technical and tactical paddle really is, like as a different sport to tennis?
I would imagine so. And I think to a certain degree it's fair enough, like having played both sports and, in terms of to get going and to get good, it's not a doubt that paddle is definitely easier in the beginning, like 100%. I think most tennis players can get pretty good within a year or a couple of years, but I definitely think it's very underestimated at that higher level. There's a very big difference where those smaller technique changes and like you mentioned, those tactical decisions are a very big part of the game, right? I still think tennis is definitely, more physically demanding and things like that. But as you start getting to that sort of more elite level, that those small little differences make a big one, overall.
Yeah.
And Louis, what does it mean personally to you to be Wales #1, especially in a sport that's still growing, really, isn't it, paddle?
Mm. Yeah, it's great. I mean, like again, it's like you said, it's fairly new. There's not necessarily loads of people playing it, but yeah, definitely a lovely feeling. Obviously, I haven't really been able to play much paddle in Wales, so that's definitely something I'd like to do more to make it feel a little bit more of a not an achievement, but to make it feel a little bit more real. But I think it's great, and hopefully it can kind of get more eyes on the sport and more people in Wales involved and get sort of the youngsters on the court a little bit earlier than what they have, and hopefully we can have a lot more Welsh players on the scene soon.
Yeah, cool. And when you're representing Wales or GB, does it change how you feel on court compared to like individual competition?
Yeah, I think there's always that little bit more pressure, like for sure, whenever you're playing a Euros or a Worlds, and a couple of times representing Wales, and obviously for Great Britain it's usually a bit more of a bigger tournament. There's a bit more pressure, but it's a special feeling, right? Like even though the sport is new, whatever sport you're representing your country is always an amazing feeling, and It's something that personally I enjoy a lot, that sort of added pressure. So yeah, it's a privilege to be able to represent the country.
We've mentioned paddle still growing, but
Mm.
quite high rate as well. How important do you think the national identity and representation is towards helping maybe gain a bit more traction and the um, legitimacy of paddle?
Yeah, I think it's what we touched on before, right? Like the more people that can see, maybe that's like a Welsh person who's playing at this level, or just British players on the scene, the better, right? Because um, I think up until now it's always been, yeah, that's a bit of a thing. They play it mainly in Spain, they play it in Argentina, in these countries, but it hasn't quite felt as real as being a main sport in the UK, right? So I think the fact that we're out there playing against some of the best in the world is only positive for the sport, and it's only a matter of time before that gets more people on the court.
Nice.
Nice.
And moving on to more like the high level you play at and your performance and mindset. As the LTA national champion 2025 and LTA #1 now, what does a typical training week like for you, like physically and mentally? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually it's quite different at the moment. So I'm living in London at the moment, which is a little bit more difficult to have, let's say, an optimal training setup. Less players, less academies, less coaches. So training is a little bit more random, especially sort of during peak season where we're traveling a lot. So like pretty much every weekend we'll be away. So you're only really back home for a couple of days, 2-3 days. So those days you're training. Maybe one day's a little bit more technical. The other day you're kind of getting a bit more match play in there. But it's very much sort of just staying sharper throughout the season rather than really training lows. That's more the first couple of months. So it's nothing crazy. Still sort of the way the sport is in the UK, we do rely a lot on competition to actually get the rhythm and to sort of make sure we're on the top of our game. So yeah, it depends sort of week to week.
Yeah. Okay.
And last year you had a really good match. I think it was you almost beat the was it the number 37 in the Euros? And
Yeah.
it was a really tight game. Like what did you take away from that match? Learning and to progress in the future.
Yeah, it was a tough match to lose because even though you could argue I played with my partner Alex, we had a pretty good year together. It was probably our best performance in terms of overall level achieved, but that does then make it hurt a bit more when you lose the match, right? Like it's you're talking very nicely about it, but then you realize you lost. But I think it was just good to see what we're capable of achieving. We were up in both the second and third set. We had match point. We had lots of chances to win the match, and I think it's just good to show ourselves that we have the option to play at that level. It's just working out a little bit harder to make sure that that becomes a little bit more consistent, and it's not necessarily just every now and then we can kind of compete at that level pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
Nice.
And at like the top end that you are playing at, how much of success do you think does come down to like mindset and decision making rather than just pure physical ability?
I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it, to be honest, especially in some of these international tournaments where the level is a lot of times very close. I'd say there's a lot of matches where the level, in terms of technically and physically, is very, very close in comparison to what let's say the ranking would say or the seeding would say. But I think, yeah, it can be a very tactical sport, and mindset and like you mentioned, decision making, I think can be a massive, massive part of the game whenever the level is fairly close. Of course, you're always going to have a match where, if there's too much technical difference or whatnot, you could have a great mindset, you're still not going to do it. But I'd say the majority of these sort of international tournaments, where you're not playing necessarily the best in the world, a lot of it comes down to that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And going from competing internationally to playing in the leagues like the Pro Paddle league with the San Diego Stingrays, what is the biggest misconception people have about the level that you compete at in those leagues?
Well, that was a great experience, and that's something a little bit different. So there, it's a different format. You're in a team with people that you haven't met. Like that was my first time, so kind of meeting everyone on the team. And there, my role is slightly different to, let's say, playing for GB, right? Whereas GB, I'm kind of expected to play pretty much, most matches and kind of come through for the team. Here it's actually more the other way around, where that was a great experience for me to sort of learn off kind of paddle legends. Essentially, lucky enough in the team, it was an ex-world number one, someone that's been top 10 for 10 plus years. So in those types of leagues, for players like myself, is more kind of learning and gaining experience from these players that have been around for a long time. Rather than necessarily worrying about competing there how you would normally, as it's a very, very different format.
Nice. Okay, and then moving on to more about like sponsorship and the growth of paddle. You obviously have quite a few sponsors: Knox, Paddle Speed, Cortis Sport, and UB. How important is like that kind of support and allowing you to compete at a professional level?
At the moment, it's everything. Like, yeah, the fact that I'm able to travel and play these tournaments is all down to them, right? Like we've mentioned, the sport is great, it's big, it's growing, but it's still not there in terms of full-time career. For a big group of players, right? Like, yes, it is, let's say top 20, top 30. They've got one big sponsor at least that they could always rely on. Whereas players around my ranking, you're relying a lot more on having 3, 4, 5 kind of smaller ones that together can make a big help in supporting your career. So yeah, at the moment, like all of those are a huge help to my career.
And having seen paddle up close in Europe, the UK, London, and the US, how quickly do you think Wales is developing compared to them and to the other paddle nations?
I think it's hard to compare because a lot of these countries are obviously a lot bigger than Wales, right? And it was already there before. There was a bit more foundation. But I think we're doing well. I mean, I think especially these last few months, I know there's 3, 4 clubs opening, and I'm always hearing about somewhere else that's either got permission or they're going to be done kind of at some point this year or next year. So I think it's good. Like I said, we're a small country, so we're not always going to be growing on the same level as some of these other places. But yeah, no, I'm confident we're going to be sort of on par with a lot of them fairly soon.
Yeah, and then in terms of like the barriers right now for young Welsh players who want to play more than just recreational paddle, like what to get into high performance pathways, what do you think the biggest barriers are for them?
Well, I think like obviously the most basic one is purely just how many clubs there are, right? Like I'm sure there's so many kids that potentially live in an area that have played on holiday or that would love to play, but there's just no club close enough to them to play. That's that first step. And then I think at the moment, even when these clubs are opening, obviously there's still a lack of coaches and more importantly sort of academies where players can go to and have the right amount of depth of players where they can turn up as a beginner and from there they can go to intermediate and they can progress up and up and up. At the moment, the amount of players there are is good, but it's still very much a random group, right? Where there's not a set structure to go from beginner, junior, all the way up. So I think that's going to take time. That when we get more clubs, then we can kind of set in a better structure. But it's the same. Like I live in London, and even here, there's not anywhere where you can kind of start from young and work your way all the way up yet. And this is where there's more clubs than anywhere in the UK. So it's going to take a little bit more time, but I think just kind of setting that foundation, more clubs, and then having a solid structure will be what we'll need to help the juniors sort of progress.
And looking on to the future, really, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years playing paddle?
I mean, hopefully, if the sport continues to kind of grow as it is, I imagine, let's say in 5 years, I'd like to see myself being sort of completely full-time paddle. At the moment, I still do, a little bit of coaching here and there to keep things through, and hopefully competing all the time on the world circuit. At the moment, I'm playing on what we call the FIP circuit internationally. I'd love to be able to, make it to what we call Premier Paddle. So that's kind of like that one level up, competing against some of the best players in the world. And then, hopefully in 10 years, it would be great to have participated in the Olympics. That would be amazing.
And then if a young player in Wales is watching your journey, you're doing really well in the LTA rankings, GB rankings. What advice would you give them about maybe either making the switch to paddle from a different sport or just getting into it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's easily said, but I think it's just go give it a try, right? More than anything, it's not necessarily a big commitment to go and play, a couple of times. It's very easy. You don't need any fancy equipment. I'd say pretty much every club that is going to be are going to have rental rackets. You can go with your family, your mates, just go and have a bit of fun. It's something that, especially at a younger age, you can do alongside other sports, right? Especially in the beginning, as we mentioned, it's only going to benefit you. And then if along the way you're really enjoying it, or it kind of takes priority over something else, then amazing. And hopefully by then, as we mentioned before, there should be, a better amount of clubs and good structure to, for someone to then guide you to keep progressing well.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that participation element will be almost a catalyst in Wales for a growth of the sport as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, like we said, we're still it's still very early on. I'm sure in a few years it might even be something that happens in some schools, right? Like that's what's happening in other countries, as like PE, and it'll become a lot more of a normality. Whereas at the moment, it's still a little bit almost exclusive, right? It's a little bit sort of, I've only played it here, or you can only play it if you remember somewhere. So yeah, I think it's only going to get easier for everyone in a few years.
Yeah. And then finally, in terms of your goals moving forward, whether it's rankings or just results, or contributing to paddle's growth, like what would you say your main goals are in the next few years?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to have finished year end as LTA number one for the second time now, so 2023, 2025, which is a great goal. This year I want to try and focus a little bit more on world ranking, so that's our GB ranking, which I'm currently at number 3. So I'd like to get that up a little bit higher, and at some point over the next few years become number 1 on the GB ranking would be fantastic. Kind of looking to break into that top 200 worldwide some point this year would be great. And then definitely to retain the national championship would be fantastic.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, Louie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been really great to hear your journey, your mindset, and your perspective on paddle at the highest level. From being Wales number 1 and LTA number 1 to competing internationally and helping grow the sport here in the UK, it's clear you're not just pushing your own level, but the level of paddle around you as well. For anyone listening who's curious about paddle or just wants to follow Louie's journey, we'll link everything in the show notes below. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.